The summer of 2018 was supposed to be perfect for the Morrison family. 8-year-old twin girls, Emma and Sophia, had spent weeks planning their first solo camping adventure in the backyard of their grandmother's mountain cabin in Pine Ridge, Colorado. Their parents, David and Rachel, watched from the kitchen window as the girls set up their small pink tent beneath the towering pines, giggling and whispering about ghost stories and midnight snacks. That was the last time anyone saw them alive. By morning, the tent was empty. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, no torn fabric or scattered belongings. The girls had simply vanished into the thin mountain air, leaving behind only their matching friendship bracelets and a half-eaten bag of marshmallows. The search that followed was relentless. Hundreds of volunteers combed the dense forest surrounding Pine Ridge. Search dogs traced scents that led nowhere. Helicopters swept the rugged terrain for any sign of the twins. David Morrison, a former Army Ranger, led his own desperate searches through ravines and abandoned mine shafts, calling their names until his voice gave out. Days turned into weeks. Weeks stretched into months. The media attention faded, the volunteers went home, and the case grew cold. Rachel Morrison stopped sleeping, haunting the empty hallways of their home. David threw himself into organizing search parties that grew smaller each weekend. The town of Pine Ridge, once filled with hope and determination, began to whisper about giving up. 7 months passed without a single lead. Then, on a crisp February morning, everything changed. Marcus Chen, a wildlife photographer testing a new thermal drone for his documentary on elk migration patterns, was capturing footage over the remote Whitewater Canyon area, nearly 15 miles from where the girls had disappeared. The canyon was considered impassable, surrounded by sheer cliff faces and dense undergrowth that even experienced hikers avoided. As Marcus reviewed the footage that evening, something caught his eye. A small thermal signature, barely visible through the canopy, moving in patterns too deliberate to be wildlife. He enhanced the image, adjusting the contrast and zooming in on the anomaly. What he saw made his blood run cold. 2 small figures, clearly human, moving slowly through a clearing. They appeared to be children, thin and frail, but alive. The timestamp on the footage showed they'd been recorded just hours earlier. Marcus didn't sleep that night. He studied the footage frame by frame, cross-referencing the location with topographical maps and missing person databases. When he found the Morrison case, his hands began to shake. The size, the movement patterns, even the way the 2 figures stayed close together, it all matched the description of the missing twins. At dawn, Marcus drove straight to the Pine Ridge Sheriff's office with his laptop clutched against his chest. Deputy Sarah Martinez initially dismissed his claims, another well-meaning citizen chasing shadows. But when she saw the thermal footage, her skepticism evaporated. Within hours, Sheriff Tom Bradley had assembled a specialized rescue team. The terrain around Whitewater Canyon was treacherous, accessible only by foot through unmarked wilderness. They would need climbing gear, medical supplies, and enough provisions for a multi-day operation. Rachel Morrison collapsed when they showed her the enhanced footage. Through tears, she whispered, "That's them. That's my girls." David stood frozen, staring at the screen where 2 ghostly figures moved through the forest like lost souls. The rescue team departed at first light, their radios crackling with updates as they navigated the dangerous approach to the canyon. The thermal drone flew overhead, tracking the heat signatures that had vanished and reappeared sporadically throughout the night. As they descended into the canyon, the team noticed signs of long-term habitation, makeshift shelters constructed from branches and debris, fire pits with cold ashes, and scattered throughout the area, children's clothing, faded and torn but unmistakably small. The breakthrough came when thermal imaging detected the signatures again, stationary this time, huddled beneath a rock overhang near a small stream. The team approached cautiously, their hearts pounding as they called out softly, "Emma? Sophia? We're here to help you." A rustling sound emerged from the shadows. Then, barely audible, a small voice replied, "Please don't hurt us." What the rescue team found beneath that overhang would haunt them forever. Two children, barely recognizable as the happy twins from the missing person photos. Their hair was matted, their clothes hanging in tatters, their eyes wide with a fear that seemed permanently etched into their faces. But they were alive. Emma, always the more talkative twin, clung to her sister as paramedics wrapped them in emergency blankets. Through chattering teeth, she managed to whisper fragments of their story. They had been taken from their tent that night, carried away by someone they couldn't see clearly in the darkness. They had been kept in different places, moved regularly, always told to stay quiet or something terrible would happen. Sophia, who had always been the quieter twin, hadn't spoken a word since the rescue began. She simply stared at the faces surrounding her, as if trying to determine whether these new adults could be trusted. As the girls were airlifted to Denver Children's Hospital, the rescue team remained in the canyon to search for evidence. What they discovered painted a disturbing picture of survival and captivity. Multiple campsites suggested the girls had been moved regularly. Food caches indicated someone had been providing for them, but barely enough to keep them alive. Most chilling of all was a journal found buried beneath one of the shelters. The handwriting was Emma's, documenting their ordeal in the simple language of a child trying to make sense of the incomprehensible. Day 23. The man brought us crackers today. Sophia cried again. I told her we have to be brave like Daddy taught us. Day 67. We heard helicopters, but he made us hide in the cave. I wanted to scream, but I was scared. Day 134. Sophia is getting sick. I gave her my blanket. I hope Mommy and Daddy are still looking for us. The entries continued for months, a heartbreaking record of two children clinging to hope in unimaginable circumstances. The handwriting grew shakier over time, the entries shorter and more desperate. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. As investigators processed the evidence, they realized the girl's captor had been methodical, organized, and possibly still in the area. The campsites showed signs of recent activity. Food wrappers bore dates from just days before the rescue. Someone had been watching them, caring for them in a twisted way, and that someone was still out there. The investigation that followed would uncover a network of deception that reached into the heart of Pine Ridge itself. Security footage from the night the girls disappeared showed a figure near their grandmother's property, someone who knew the area well enough to navigate it in complete darkness. Phone records revealed calls made to a burner phone from within the town during the early days of the search, possibly coordination between the kidnapper and an accomplice. Financial records showed unusual cash withdrawals from several local accounts in the weeks following the disappearance. But the most shocking revelation came from Emma herself during a carefully conducted interview with child psychologists. Between tears and long silences, she described their captor as someone who spoke with a familiar accent, someone who knew details about their family that only a local would know. "He knew about my loose tooth," she whispered to the therapist. "He knew about Sophia's fear of thunder. He knew things about us that strangers wouldn't know." The realization hit the investigation team like a physical blow. The person who had taken the Morrison twins wasn't a random predator passing through town. It was someone from Pine Ridge, someone who had sat in the same meetings where search strategies were discussed, someone who had possibly even helped in the search efforts while knowing exactly where the girls were hidden. As the twins began their long recovery, surrounded by the love of their family and the best medical care available, the hunt for their captor intensified. The drone footage that had saved their lives became the key to an investigation that would expose the darkest secrets of a small mountain town. The thermal signatures had revealed more than just two missing children. They had unveiled a conspiracy that reached deeper into the community than anyone had imagined, and the most dangerous predator was still among them, watching and waiting for the next opportunity to strike. The investigation was about to take a dark turn. Emma's final journal entry, the one that had led to their rescue, contained details that chilled even seasoned investigators. She had written about the men who kept them, describing his voice, his habits, his knowledge of their family's routines. But most disturbing was her observation that he seemed to know exactly when search parties were coming. Detective Harrison, the lead investigator from the state police, arrived in Pine Ridge 3 days after the girls' rescue. He was a veteran of complex cases, but the Morrison disappearance had elements that made him deeply uneasy. He set up a temporary command center in the town hall, its walls soon covered with maps, photographs, and timelines. The first breakthrough came when Emma, still recovering in the hospital, began to speak more freely. She described their captor's routine visits, how he would bring them food and supplies, always at night. She remembered him talking about other children, children who had been difficult and had to be sent away. The way she said it, with that peculiar detachment that trauma survivors often develop, made Harrison's blood run cold. Sophia, meanwhile, remained largely silent. The medical team treating her noted signs of severe psychological trauma that went beyond typical kidnapping cases. She would only communicate through drawings, creating disturbing images of figures in the woods, cabins hidden in trees, and other children who looked frightened and alone. As Harrison delved deeper into the case, he uncovered a pattern that stretched back years. Missing persons reports from surrounding counties, all involving children who had vanished during family outings in remote areas. The disappearances were spread across different jurisdictions, different years, making it nearly impossible to connect them without looking for the specific pattern that Emma's testimony had revealed. The man they were hunting wasn't just a kidnapper. He was a collector, someone who had been operating in the wilderness of Colorado for possibly decades. The sophisticated network of shelters, supply caches, and surveillance points that the rescue teams had discovered suggested a level of organization that spoke to years of planning and preparation. What made the case even more disturbing was the realization that their captor had help. Emma's journal entries mentioned hearing multiple voices, seeing different people who would visit the hidden camps. This wasn't the work of a single disturbed individual, but rather a coordinated operation with multiple participants. The investigation revealed that the man had an intimate knowledge of search and rescue protocols. He knew how teams operated, what areas they would search first, and how to move his captives to avoid detection. This suggested someone with either law enforcement or military training, someone who understood the system from the inside. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Harrison realized they were dealing with something far more sinister than a simple kidnapping. The evidence pointed to a trafficking operation that had been using the vast wilderness of Colorado as its base of operations. The remote locations, the network of hidden shelters, the systematic approach to avoiding detection, all suggested a criminal enterprise that had been operating under the radar for years. The Morrison twins had been rescued, but their ordeal had exposed something much darker. Somewhere in the mountains, other children might still be held captive. The investigation was no longer just about solving a kidnapping case. It had become a race against time to uncover a criminal network and save whatever victims might still be out there. Emma's courage in leaving behind clues, in documenting their captivity, even under the most terrifying circumstances, had opened a door that law enforcement had been unable to find for years. But walking through that door meant confronting the possibility that dozens of other families had suffered the same agonizing loss as the Morrisons, and that some of those children might never be found. The drone footage that had initially revealed the twins' location was just the beginning. As Harrison coordinated with federal authorities to expand the investigation, he knew that the Morrison case would likely become the key to unraveling one of the most sophisticated criminal operations the region had ever seen. The truth was darker than anyone had imagined, but Emma and Sophia Morrison's survival had finally given law enforcement the breakthrough they needed to begin bringing it to light. The evidence was mounting like a house of cards, and each new discovery made the entire structure more unstable. Detective Alvarez and Agent Bell had been working around the clock, following every lead from Emma's journal, but what they uncovered next would shake their investigation to its core. 3 days after Emma's rescue, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A park ranger from a neighboring county contacted the task force with disturbing information. He'd been reviewing old incident reports and found something that made his blood run cold. Over the past 5 years, there had been 17 separate reports of children going missing during family camping trips, all within a 200-mile radius of Pine Ridge. The pattern was almost invisible unless you knew what to look for. Each disappearance followed the same blueprint. A family would arrive at a remote campsite, seemingly chosen at random. The children would vanish during the night, leaving behind no trace, no footprints, no sign of struggle. Search efforts would be massive, but ultimately fruitless. Then, months later, the children would reappear, traumatized and unable to provide coherent details about their captivity. But here's what chilled everyone to the bone. Every single family had one thing in common. They'd all received camping permits from the same local office, processed by the same clerk, a woman named Rebecca Torres who'd worked for the Forestry Service for over a decade. Torres had access to detailed family information camping schedules, and most importantly, she knew exactly where each family would be staying. Agent Bell immediately ran Torres through every database they had. What they found was a carefully constructed false identity. The real Rebecca Torres had died in a car accident 12 years ago. The woman who'd been issuing camping permits was a ghost, someone who'd stolen an identity and used it to orchestrate the systematic kidnapping of children across multiple states. The fake Rebecca Torres had vanished the same day Emma and Sophia were found. Her office was cleared out, her apartment abandoned, and her vehicle discovered burned out in a remote ravine 50 miles from Pine Ridge. But she'd left behind something crucial, something that would expose the true scope of this operation. Hidden in a false bottom of her desk drawer, investigators found a leather-bound ledger. Page after page contained detailed records of every family she'd targeted, names, addresses, camping dates, and most disturbing of all, buyer information. The children weren't just being kidnapped randomly. They were being sold to order, like merchandise in a catalog. Emma's journal had mentioned the numbers they were assigned. Now it all made sense. The children were being categorized, processed, and distributed to buyers across the country. The ledger contained shipping addresses in 12 different states, payment records totaling millions of dollars, and a network of contacts that reached into the highest levels of society. But the most shocking discovery came when Agent Bell cross-referenced the buyer information with law enforcement databases. 3 of the names belonged to prominent politicians, 2 were federal judges, and 1 was a sitting member of Congress. This wasn't just a kidnapping ring operating in the wilderness. This was a sophisticated trafficking network that had been protected by powerful people for years. The investigation exploded into a multi-agency operation. FBI task forces in 6 states began simultaneous raids on addresses from the ledger. What they found in those raids would haunt investigators for years to come: hidden rooms, restraint systems, and evidence of unspeakable abuse. But they also found something else: more children, dozens of them, all bearing the same hollow, traumatized expression that Emma and Sophia had carried. As news of the raids broke, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. The Pine Ridge operation wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a vast network that had been operating for over a decade, protected by corruption at every level of government. The thermal drone footage that had initially saved Emma and Sophia had inadvertently exposed one of the largest child trafficking operations in American history. But even as arrests were made and children were rescued, investigators knew they were only scratching the surface. The ledger contained coded references to something called the Collection, a gathering that occurred twice a year at a location simply identified as the ranch. The next gathering was scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Emma, despite her trauma, insisted on helping the investigation. She'd seen things during her captivity that could help locate the ranch and save the children who were still trapped there. Her detailed descriptions of the terrain, the buildings, and the people she'd encountered became crucial intelligence for the rescue operation being planned. The stakes couldn't be higher. Intelligence suggested that the collection was when the trafficking network's most valuable merchandise was auctioned to their highest-paying clients. If they could infiltrate this gathering, they might be able to rescue dozens of children and finally bring down the entire operation. As Agent Bell studied satellite images and topographical maps, searching for locations that matched Emma's descriptions. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were racing against time. The network had been operating for years, perfecting their methods, building their client base, and corrupting officials at every level. The thermal drone that had initially been testing new equipment had accidentally captured more than just two missing girls. It had provided a window into a world of unimaginable darkness, where children were treated as commodities and powerful people used their influence to protect unspeakable crimes. Emma's rescue had been just the beginning. Now came the hardest part: using her testimony and the evidence they'd gathered to infiltrate the collection, rescue the remaining children, and finally bring justice to the victims of this horrific network. The countdown to the next gathering had begun, and failure wasn't an option. The investigation had revealed that Emma and Sophia's disappearance was part of something far more sinister than anyone had imagined. What started as a search for two missing girls had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power, protected by corruption and enabled by the very people sworn to protect children. Now, with 3 weeks until the collection, every second counted. The race was on to save the children still trapped in this nightmare, and to ensure that the people responsible would finally face justice for their crimes. The investigation that began with a simple thermal drone was about to reach its most dangerous phase. Federal agents had uncovered evidence of a sprawling criminal network, but they were also racing against time to prevent what appeared to be a major trafficking event called the collection. Detective Sarah Chen, who had been coordinating with multiple agencies, received an urgent call at 3 a.m. A surveillance team monitoring communications intercepted a coded message that suggested the auction was being moved up. The original date had been compromised, and now they had less than 72 hours to locate the ranch and shut down the operation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Marcus Chen, the wildlife photographer whose drone had first spotted the twins, had been quietly reviewing months of his aerial footage from across the region. He discovered something that made his blood run cold. In 12 different locations, spread across 3 states, his drone had captured brief glimpses of children in remote areas. All of them appeared to be living in primitive conditions, hidden far from any marked trails or campsites. Marcus immediately contacted the FBI with his findings. The locations formed a rough network, each positioned near abandoned mining sites, old logging camps, or decommissioned ranger stations. It was a systematic operation, far larger than anyone had initially suspected. The twins Emma and Sophia had been just one small part of a massive trafficking ring that had been operating for years. Agent Rodriguez, now leading the Joint Task Force, studied the aerial footage with growing urgency. The pattern was clear. Children were being moved between locations, kept in temporary camps until they could be transported to the main facility. The permits issued by the fake forestry official weren't just for individual kidnappings. They were part of a coordinated system designed to give the traffickers legitimate-looking cover for their activities in remote wilderness areas. The investigative team had identified several key figures in the network. Beyond the woman who had impersonated a forestry official, they had evidence linking the operation to a corrupt judge who had been dismissing missing persons cases, a state politician who had been redirecting search and rescue resources, and a wealthy businessman who owned several remote properties that could serve as the ranch. Emma Morrison, though still recovering from her ordeal, provided crucial details about the structure of the operation. She had overheard conversations between her captors about other children, other locations, and the man they called the Collector. He was the one who decided which children would be moved where, and ultimately, which ones would be sold at the auction. The forensic analysis of Emma's journal revealed coded references to at least 15 other children who had passed through their camp over the 7 months the twins were held. Some of the names matched missing persons reports from across the region. Others were children who had never been officially reported missing, likely runaways or kids from troubled homes where their absence might not be immediately noticed. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the child psychologist working with the twins, made a disturbing discovery while reviewing Emma's drawings. The girl had sketched detailed maps of the various camps where she and Sophia had been held. The drawings showed a sophisticated network of underground tunnels, hidden supply caches, and communication systems. This wasn't the work of opportunistic criminals. It was a professional operation with extensive planning and resources. The pressure was mounting as the 72-hour deadline approached. Intelligence suggested that the collection would involve buyers from multiple countries, with children being sold to the highest bidders. The event was designed to liquidate the entire network's inventory before law enforcement could close in. Agent Rodriguez coordinated with international law enforcement agencies, as evidence suggested the trafficking ring had connections to similar operations in other countries. The scope was staggering. What had started as a search for 2 missing girls had uncovered an international criminal enterprise that had been operating for at least a decade. The twins' parents, David and Rachel Morrison, struggled with the knowledge that their daughters had been part of something so vast and horrific. They had initially felt relief that Emma and Sophia were safe, but now they understood that the nightmare was far from over. Their daughters would need to testify about what they had witnessed, potentially putting them in danger from associates of the network who were still at large. As the investigation intensified, the team discovered that the trafficking network had been using advanced technology to coordinate their operations. Encrypted communications, drone surveillance of their own, and sophisticated logistics planning had allowed them to stay ahead of law enforcement for years. The fake forestry permits were just one small part of a much larger deception. The evidence pointed to the ranch being located in a remote area of the Montana wilderness, on property owned by a shell corporation linked to the wealthy businessman. Satellite imagery showed recently constructed buildings, vehicle access roads, and what appeared to be holding facilities designed to house multiple children. Federal agents prepared for what would be one of the largest coordinated raids in recent history. Multiple teams would simultaneously hit known locations across 3 states, with the primary target being the ranch itself. The operation was complicated by the remote locations and the need to ensure the safety of any children who might be held at the facilities. Emma Morrison, despite her trauma, insisted on helping the investigation. She had memorized faces, voices, and details that could be crucial for identifying other members of the network. Her courage in the face of such horror inspired the entire investigative team, but it also highlighted the urgent need to shut down the operation before more children could be harmed. The final phase of the investigation was about to begin. Years of careful planning by the criminals was about to collide with months of determined police work. The fate of potentially dozens of children hung in the balance, and the window for action was rapidly closing. As dawn broke on what would be the day of the coordinated raids, Agent Rodriguez knew that they had one chance to get this right. The network was too sophisticated and too well connected to survive a failed operation. If they couldn't shut it down completely, the criminals would simply disappear, taking their victims with them, and the cycle of horror would continue elsewhere. The race against time intensified as Operation Mountain Shield entered its final phase. FBI task forces positioned themselves across 17 states, while international partners prepared simultaneous raids in Canada, Mexico, and 3 European countries. The sophistication of this trafficking network had exceeded even the most experienced investigators' worst fears. Emma's journal entries had revealed not just the horror of individual captivity, but the industrial scale of child exploitation that had been operating under everyone's noses for more than a decade. On the morning of what would have been the collection, federal agents moved with precision that came from months of meticulous planning. The ranch, hidden deep within a seemingly abandoned mining complex in Nevada, became the primary target. Thermal imaging revealed the presence of at least 40 individuals on the property, including what appeared to be children in basement-level rooms. The facility had been constructed with escape routes, reinforced doors, and surveillance systems that would have impressed military contractors. As dawn broke over the desert landscape, the simultaneous raids began. The first breakthrough came from the Nevada team, who discovered a sophisticated underground facility complete with auction rooms, holding cells, and communication equipment linking to servers across 3 continents. The basement levels contained evidence that made even seasoned investigators pause in horror. Children's belongings, medical records, and transaction logs painted a picture of systematic abuse that had generated millions in illegal profits. The man Emma had identified as Marcus, the fake forestry official, was captured attempting to flee through a hidden tunnel system. His real name was Marcus Kellerman, a former military contractor with expertise in remote operations and wilderness survival. His capture led to the immediate arrest of 12 additional conspirators, including the corrupt sheriff's deputy who had deliberately misdirected the initial search efforts for Emma and Sophia. But the most shocking discovery came from the facility's computer servers. The network had been operating under the code name Wilderness Exchange, using legitimate outdoor recreation businesses as fronts for their activities. Summer camps, hiking guide services, and even some children's outdoor education programs had been infiltrated or entirely fabricated to provide cover for trafficking operations. The scope was staggering, with evidence pointing to over 300 missing children across North America over the past 15 years. Emma's testimony became the cornerstone of what would eventually be called the largest child trafficking prosecution in United States history. Her courage in providing detailed accounts, despite the trauma she had endured, proved instrumental in connecting seemingly unrelated disappearances across multiple jurisdictions. The journal she had kept, written in secret, using materials she had managed to conceal, provided investigators with dates, descriptions, and conversations that corroborated evidence found at multiple raid sites. Sophia's recovery proved more challenging. The trauma of captivity had left her largely nonverbal, requiring specialized therapeutic intervention. Child psychologists noted that her condition was consistent with prolonged psychological abuse designed to break down resistance and create compliance. Her gradual recovery became a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the power of specialized trauma care. The investigation revealed that the trafficking network had exploited specific vulnerabilities in the system. Remote wilderness areas provided perfect cover for illegal activities, while the jurisdictional complexities of crimes spanning multiple states and federal lands created investigative gaps that criminals had learned to exploit. The network had also invested heavily in technology, using encrypted communications, cryptocurrency transactions, and sophisticated counter-surveillance measures that had kept them hidden for years. Financial forensics uncovered a web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and cryptocurrency wallets containing over $40 million in proceeds from trafficking activities. The money trail led to some of the most respected names in various industries, revealing that the client base extended far beyond the stereotypical image of predators. Corporate executives, politicians, and even some individuals involved in child welfare organizations had been participating in what investigators termed a marketplace for innocence. The legal proceedings that followed set numerous precedents for prosecuting complex trafficking cases. Federal prosecutors employed RICO statutes typically reserved for organized crime, arguing successfully that the network constituted a criminal enterprise. The first wave of trials resulted in convictions carrying sentences ranging from 25 years to life in prison. Marcus Kellerman received 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. International cooperation proved crucial in dismantling the global aspects of the network. The Canadian operation had been using indigenous reservation lands to exploit jurisdictional complexities, while the European cells had been operating through legitimate-seeming child welfare organizations. The coordination required to execute simultaneous raids across multiple countries demonstrated both the international nature of the threat and the potential for cooperative law enforcement response. Emma and Sophia's recovery journey became a model for trauma-informed care for trafficking survivors. The specialized facility where they received treatment developed new protocols for helping children process extreme trauma while preserving their ability to participate in legal proceedings. Their case highlighted the need for long-term support systems that extend far beyond immediate rescue operations. The Morrison family's advocacy work, born from their unimaginable experience, led to significant policy changes. The Emma and Sophia Act, passed by Congress 18 months after their rescue, established new protocols for missing children cases in remote areas, mandated improved interagency coordination, and created dedicated funding for advanced search technologies. The legislation also established new standards for background checks in outdoor recreation industries and created a national database for tracking suspicious activities in wilderness areas. Technology played a crucial role not just in the eventual rescue, but in the ongoing efforts to prevent similar crimes. The thermal drone footage that first revealed the girls' location led to the development of new search protocols combining satellite imagery, thermal detection, and artificial intelligence to identify potential trafficking sites in remote locations. These tools have since been credited with preventing numerous other trafficking operations. The Pine Ridge community underwent its own healing process. The revelation that trusted individuals had been complicit in the trafficking network shattered assumptions about small-town safety. Community meetings, counseling services, and new neighborhood watch programs emerged as residents grappled with the reality that evil had been hiding in plain sight. The local sheriff's department was completely restructured with new leadership and enhanced training requirements. Educational initiatives stemming from the case reached schools nationwide, age-appropriate programs teaching children about personal safety, recognizing dangerous situations, and understanding that help is always available became standard curriculum in many districts. Emma's story, carefully adapted for educational purposes, became a powerful tool for helping other children understand the importance of speaking up when something feels wrong. 5 years after their rescue, Emma and Sophia Morrison continue their healing journey. Emma has become a powerful advocate for trafficking survivors, working with law enforcement agencies to improve victim services and speaking at conferences about survivor experiences. Her articulate testimony and unwavering courage have inspired legislative changes and policy improvements across multiple states. Sophia's recovery has been more gradual but equally remarkable. Through specialized therapy and the unwavering support of her family, she has slowly reclaimed her voice and her childhood. Her artwork, created during therapy sessions, has been featured in exhibitions raising awareness about trafficking and the healing power of creative expression. The case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches missing children cases, particularly in remote areas. The initial assumption that the girls had simply become lost in the wilderness nearly allowed their captors to escape justice entirely. New protocols now require immediate consideration of trafficking as a potential factor in any missing child case, regardless of location or circumstances. Perhaps most importantly, the Morrison twins' story serves as a reminder that evil often hides behind facades of normalcy and respectability. The trafficking network operated successfully for over a decade precisely because it appeared legitimate to casual observers. The fake forestry official, the corrupt deputy, the respectable business fronts, all represented calculated deceptions designed to exploit trust and authority. Today, Emma and Sophia Morrison represent hope in its purest form. Their survival against impossible odds, their courage in seeking justice, and their ongoing recovery demonstrate that even the darkest circumstances cannot extinguish the human spirit's capacity for resilience. Their story continues to inspire law enforcement, professionals, policymakers, and communities to remain vigilant against those who would exploit the innocent. Today, Emma and Sophia Morrison are thriving teenagers who have transformed unimaginable trauma into a powerful force for change. Their foundation, established with the help of victim advocacy groups, has directly contributed to the rescue of over 200 children worldwide. The sisters regularly speak at law enforcement conferences, sharing insights that only survivors can provide about the psychological tactics used by traffickers and the warning signs that adults often miss. The technological breakthrough that saved them has revolutionized search and rescue operations globally. Thermal imaging drones are now standard equipment for missing person cases, while artificial intelligence systems can analyze massive amounts of data to identify trafficking patterns in real time. The Morrison Protocol, named in their honor, requires immediate activation of these advanced technologies within the first 48 hours of any child disappearance. Law enforcement agencies have fundamentally restructured their approach to missing children cases. The fake credentials and forged documents that allowed the trafficking ring to operate undetected for years prompted the creation of a centralized verification system that cross-references all permits and official documentation. Interstate cooperation has improved dramatically, with specialized task forces now sharing intelligence instantly across jurisdictions. The corruption that protected this network reached shocking levels, with 17 government officials ultimately convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Their removal from positions of power has allowed for transparency reforms that make such systematic cover-ups far more difficult to maintain. Perhaps most importantly, communities nationwide have embraced a new vigilance. Parents are better educated about online safety, stranger danger, and the sophisticated methods traffickers use to gain trust. Schools now implement comprehensive safety programs, and neighbors actively participate in protection networks that would have identified suspicious activity much sooner. The ranch and its associated facilities have been permanently dismantled, but the investigation continues. International partnerships have exposed similar operations on 3 continents, proving that Emma and Sophia's courage has sparked a global reckoning with child trafficking. Their story reminds us that evil often hides behind legitimate facades, but it also demonstrates the incredible resilience of the human spirit. These remarkable young women didn't just survive their ordeal, they've ensured that countless other children will never experience what they endured. Their legacy continues to grow stronger with each life saved and each predator brought to justice.